So we continue to reflect on the historical Jesus and seek what type of benefit his teaching, his life means for we who follow Jesus. This morning I want to talk about hope. And again, from the perspective of what Jesus said about this. And I'll use some famous words from Jesus. I think you're all familiar with. Come to me, Jesus said, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. That could also be peace. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, what we're trying to do here. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest or peace for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Very comforting words when you live in a world like ours. Now, from childhood, we all hope for good things. Is that right? We're still hoping, I don't care what your age is, for a good life. We want the best for our children and grandchildren, our parents. We hope for the best in this world because we're not guaranteed things will always work out the way we hope in this world. We do have some control over having a good life, a good education, a good job, making the right choice in a good partner for marriage, good decisions about money, health. A little bit of self-discipline goes a long way in our culture, and we do have some control over having a good life. All of these provisions in our culture usually mean good things: happiness, satisfaction, and peace of mind. Much of this, however, has to do with the country that we live in. Billions of people in our world right now have no hope of many of the things and the blessings that we take for granted because we live in a free society. They don't have opportunity to improve their life because of education, job, etc. So that's why I would suggest so many risk so much to come to our country, to have a good life, to have hope for a good life. But even in the United States, with all the opportunities and services, we know that life can disappoint us and even devastate us. The Bible's wisdom literature, Job, Ecclesiastes, the Proverbs and Psalms, remind us that there's benefit in following the path that God lays out for life. But even doing your best is no guarantee that nothing bad is going to happen to us or our loved ones. That is in the Bible. So some would say, why bother trying to live a good life if some tragedy is just around the corner and will befall us? Why not eat, drink, and be merry? Because tomorrow we die. Why not go for the gusto? Well, listen, even Jesus said in Matthew 5:45, God causes his sun to shine on evil people and good people. Jesus said he sends rain on those who do right and those who don't. How many of you know a bad person, a mean person, an immoral person, a corrupt person, who seems to have everything going his or her way? Done stuff all their life, and all they seem to do is be blessed by it. Yeah. They got lots of money. They have good health. People even idolize them and look up to them. And no matter their bad behavior, they still get accolades in our community because they appear to be so successful. And they are, usually monetarily. And then there's a poor person, but has a loving, wonderful, loving spirit, generous heart, never critical of others, forgiving, humble, but seems to be cursed. Bad things continue to happen to him. They could have poor health. They could be poor monetarily. They could be even mistreated by their own spouse and have their children turn against them. Some would say they're Job-like. Remember the story of Job?
Yeah.
People say people like that are cursed or they have bad luck. So we know that life can be very unfair, unpredictable, and unbearable. And again, I want to remind you, it's not that God is punishing or testing you. It's not bad luck, as in some mysterious force in the universe that's happening to you or someone. It's life in this world. In a world where a tornado will kill an innocent 2-year-old, yet the wife-beating bigot next door walks away unscathed. That's this world. Unfair. Doesn't make sense. We have limited control, again, in this life. But there's many things out of control. Now, again, I don't want this to be a bummer sermon, but I want us to consider some few things. For example, recently we learned that this young man, an officer, Officer Singh, an immigrant himself, by all accounts was a loving husband and father, respectful, hard-working, conscientious, a grateful immigrant from Fiji, was doing his job, looking out for the safety of others, he always wanted to do, when he was murdered by a gang member. I'm certain that he was not expecting that to happen for his family, but it happened. It's life in this world. That was Bubbles. When her mother sent her to school, she couldn't fathom that a school bus driver taking children home from school, texting while driving, would hit Bubbles and 2 other little girls and kill all 3 of them. Bubbles did not do anything to deserve that. It's part of the world, the incredibly painful, cruel world that we all live in. Now, Jesus lived in a time, for example, that saw that type of suffering. For example, the mortality rate for children in the time of Jesus was incredibly high. It's estimated that 60% of children who lived to be age 5, 60% of those died before reaching age 16. 60% of children were gone. Now, by the way, that is also the case in many parts of the world today where there's poverty. An alarming mortality rate amongst children. Poverty and disease take their toll on people, especially children, even today. As many of you know, for example, if I excuse this personal reference, my brother Rod lost his only child that he had raised by himself. And his son Rodney was 23 years old, a great young man, died to H1N1 flu. He died of the flu. It'll be 5 years this February. My brother hasn't recovered yet. I don't think he ever will. This is part of the world that we live in. Now again, Jesus, I appreciate Danny mentioning the human Jesus. He saw this type of suffering in his life. There in Nazareth, children dying, people suffering. And what was Jesus' answer to living in a world where even children suffer? In a world where it's just hard to go on sometimes, especially, for example, when a child dies. How do you cope when our dreams are shattered? No fault of your own. How do we go on? How do we go on when we've blown it? Made a mess of things. Hurt ourselves, hurt others. Central to Jesus' message to those hurting in this world was a profound assurance that God cared for them in spite of what was going on, even if they hurt themselves. That he was present to carry them through, no matter what. And by the way, Jesus never came on to talk to sufferers and say, don't worry, when you die, you're going to heaven. Now, Jesus believed that, and that's part of the hope that we have. But Jesus was addressing people who were hurting now, in this life. And his message was, again, you never have to face this or go through this alone. There's a God who loves you, and he's with you every step of the way to help get you through it. So when life strips us of all that we treasure, and sometimes treasure the most, God remains, according to Jesus, a vital, real presence and strength to get us through times of trouble. Amen. And man, if there was ever a time in our culture when people needed to hear those comforting words. Now, by the way, right today, there has been already a sermon, one in particular, by a man who has 40,000 plus people sitting in his church and millions watching on TV, who says things that I think don't represent what Jesus said to hurting people. In other words, that God will take care of you. He'll restore everything that's lost, and you never will have to go through suffering. The problem with that, it's not reality. And so when you're expecting God to take care of you and prevent any bad thing from happening to you, and when you're devastated by life, what happens to one's faith in God? I've talked to a lot of people for whom that has become a real problem. Where was God? I've read that 50% of Jewish people lost their faith because of the Holocaust. And I think I've told you the story where Jewish prisoners were made to watch two fellow inmates and a 9-year-old boy hang, was executed in front of them. And Eli Wiesel remembers hearing a Jew behind him saying, while that child was hanging and thrashing and dying slowly, where is God? So if your theology is God never lets anything bad happen to you, that's going to come back and disappoint you. So when life, not God, does something to devastate us, Jesus was saying, God is there to help you through. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon me and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble of heart, not like this ruthless world can be. And you will find rest and peace for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. God comes to lift the burden, to make life easier, not harder, not to test us. We don't need that because life does that to us. We have a gentle God, a caring God. Paul wrote to the Romans in the 5th chapter, and the church is going through some difficult times, a time of crisis. Paul wrote, he says, we are confident in our sufferings. He doesn't say, hey, we're not suffering. He says, we are confident in our sufferings, brothers and sisters, knowing that this suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not disappoint us. Why? Because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit which He's given us. The God we serve comes along in times of crisis and gives us strength that we can be even confident in it, that we know we can live with hope. And when you're in a time that's low and you're hurting and you're suffering or you're worried about somebody, there's nothing more beneficial that we need is some character and strength that we have from the God who is with us. That's what Jesus was saying. God is there. He'll never forsake you. And by the way, even beyond the grave, facing death. Now, the promise that we have is that we can live. And by the way, we still ask God to protect us, right? We still ask God to bless us. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. But when this world treats us bad, and things happen that can be devastating, we have the promise of a God who will see us through, and that we can have endurance, strength, and live with hope. And some of you have gone through that and know what I'm talking about. In fact, some of you that have suffered like that have become a real source of strength to the rest of us. In your time of suffering and loss, you have been a pillar to us. That's faith. That's real hope in this world. We can live with hope and be positive and not live in fear as we live in this world.
Amen.
Amen.